So the third question on the paper is what's known as the cross-referencing question, where you're required to cross-reference 3 different sources. Now it's always source A, source B and source C, and we've already come across source A and B already, so in a minute I will be introducing you to source C. I actually think that this is the most trickiest question on the paper, simply because the question can be structured in 2 different ways. There is a more straightforward structure, and then there's the one that we're going to be looking at today. Now, this question is: study sources A, B and C. Do these sources support the view that the Rosenbergs were innocent? Explain your answer using the sources. Now, where some students go wrong is that they take each source individually and they say whether that source is saying that the Rosenbergs were innocent. So they usually have a paragraph on C saying if the Rosenbergs were innocent, they might have one on B, and then they might have one on A. And the reason that that isn't a good thing to do is because the majority of marks in this question are for you cross-referencing between sources. So talking about what they've got in common and how they're different. Now, if you did do that in the exam, so you just cross-reference the source to the statement, you wouldn't get more than 5 out of 10. So you've got to be really, really careful. Just while we're on this slide, the other way that the question can be worded, which I think is actually a lot nicer, is, let's just quickly get the colour. How far does source A support sources B and C about something? And that's a bit more straightforward, because you know that you've got to compare source A to source B and source A to source C. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we do practice this question because it is slightly trickier. What the examiner's looking for is that you show both support and challenge between the sources when you're cross-referencing, so you're looking for similarities and differences, and that you make a judgment on how far the sources support this view. Although I did say that you didn't have to print anything out, actually from now and for question 4 and question 5 you may find it useful to have the sources with you. So you could either print them out from the Edexcel website, or if you visit our school Twitter page, I will post this PowerPoint directly onto there and you can print the sources out from there. So this is source C, and I will just give you 30 seconds just to have a read through that source. Okay, so hopefully you read the provenance as well. It was something that was said by Emanuel Bloch, who was the lawyer who defended the Rosenbergs, and he's speaking, I think, after their execution. And if you have a look through, you can see that the message of the source is actually that the Rosenbergs were being used as scapegoats, that America had to have this case in order to be able to get permission or support for their increased war budgets, and in order for the American people to accept the Korean War. Now, these are our 3 sources, and if you remember, our question is, do these sources support the view that the Rosenbergs were innocent? Now, I'm just going to show you how you could begin to analyse the sources. So the first thing that I would advise you to do would be to create yourself a very quick table or grid on the actual sources paper that you're given in the exam. Now on one side we're going to look for similarities between the sources. And on the other side we will be looking for differences. Just bear with me while I create a very, very quick table. Okay. So the first thing that I would probably say in terms of similarities is that source B, sorry, keep doing that, source B and source C are both implying that the government had lied or exaggerated evidence. Now, I can't show you the sources at the same time as this table, but if we quickly go back to this slide, you can see that in source B, the people in the crowd are holding placards, and this one here is implying that a government minister had actually lied. And if you have a look here in source C, it's saying that there had to be a Rosenberg case in order for Americans to agree and accept foreign policy. Okay, and so I wouldn't necessarily write down what quotes or the evidence I was going to use here. This would be literally where I would jot down my ideas, and then obviously when I was writing up my answer, I would make sure that I gave evidence from the sources to support that point. I would also say that there was another similarity between source B and source C, because they both suggest that the Rosenbergs shouldn't have been executed. And my evidence again for that would be here. In B, people are protesting against the trial and against them being executed. And in source C, the whole message of that source is about them being scapegoats, and that, you know, the death sentence wasn't fair, although it wasn't surprising. I then might actually come over to the other side of our table and try to highlight some differences. So if we have a look at source A and source C, there's quite a fair amount of difference between these two sources. Firstly, source A is from the judge who was presiding over the case, and he is trying to defend his decision, whereas C is from the lawyer of the Rosenbergs, who is determined to show their innocence. We could also have here that source A is saying that they should be executed, whereas source C is saying that they shouldn't and that they were being used as scapegoats. And then at that point, while I'm on the point of them being scapegoats, I might come back over here and just jot down another similarity, which would be between source A and source C, because in source C it claims that the Rosenbergs were being used as scapegoats for the Korean War, and in source A, the judge actually mentions the Korean War and puts some blame on the Rosenbergs themselves. Now, in the exam, if you produce something like this within your answer, this would definitely be getting top level 2, so 7 out of 10. In order to push your answer into level 3, what you need to do is start to make a judgment on the degree of support or the extent. So what I'm going to do now is just go through with a different colour and just show you what I mean by that. Now, if you look at source A and source C over here, I would say that there was a strong amount of disagreement between these two sources. because source A is from the judge and he was trying to defend his decision, whereas source C was from the lawyer who was determined to show their innocence. In addition to that, here as well, I would probably say that there was again strong disagreement here between sources A and C with regards to the execution, because we know that source A was calling for it, whereas C was saying that they were being used as scapegoats. And if we have a look over here, when we looked at sources B and C, they were fairly similar. So there was a fairly strong amount of agreement between these two sources. And then really the final thing that you want to do in terms of your thinking for this question is to think about how far the sources actually support the view that the Rosenbergs were innocent. And from our analysis, we would probably be thinking that there is a fair amount of support from the sources to suggest that the Rosenbergs were innocent, because both sources B and C were wholly supporting that view.